Hello! Welcome to Why Not Both, the podcast all about how our multiple passions and interests shape our identity and our lives. My name is Pam Schaefer, and I am a musician and therapist in Los Angeles, and I also happen to be your host. This podcast is produced by Laura Studeris, and for this season, we've partnered up with Under the Radar magazine. If you like what you hear, you can hang out with us on social media. We are on Twitter and Instagram at WNB the podcast. And if you really, really like what you hear, please support us on Patreon. We are under Why Not Both podcast. When you join our Patreon, you get a whole bunch of really cool behind the scenes stuff and you get to chat with us. And that's pretty awesome. Thank you so much for your support, and I hope you enjoy our interviews. This week, we got to spend some time with the wonderful and multi-talented Laura Gomez. I hope that you enjoy our interview.
I will say the name of my podcast just to plug it here.
Yes, please.
So it's going to be difficult for English speakers. It's called Baraja Eso. So Baraja is Baraja. Eso. Again, it's a Spanish name, and we're going to have one English episode per month. And our first one was with Piper Kerman, author of the memoir of Orange is the New Black. And next month we have, this month, we're going to have Stacey Ann Chin, who is a Jamaican poet and gay activist and amazing human.
Oh my gosh.
And yeah, so I'm very excited about the guests we're having in English.
I was going to say, I was like, one, those guests are amazing. And two, I was like, I'm going to recommend your podcast to my friends who also speak Spanish as well, so that then I selfishly can have them translate. So I know.
Yes, please. Any people who speak Spanish here, the podcast is Baraja Eso.
Baraja Eso.
There you go. Yes, that was really good.
Thanks.
Which is a Dominican term that means just change the subject. Let's just change course of things. I thought it would be an idea of evolution. Let's evolve on an idea.
Oh my gosh, I could not possibly love that more. I was like, change. There's a quote from Octavia Butler that change is God, and I was like, oh.
It's all new. All this do-it-yourself type of world where I'm both, we are all the things at the same time. Right now I'm auditioning from home, and of course I have to have a lighting set and voiceover set, and you have to be a DP and an editor. It's really sharpening my filmmaking skills for sure.
It's so funny because like my first question was going to be like, so what have you been doing? And I'm like, well, that you've been doing everything. You've been doing quite literally everything.
You mean you or us or the world?
Well, it's funny because like before, like in the before times, I would ask people like, oh, what is it you do? Like to explain to guests. And now it's kind of like been a real free for all. Everything has changed. And now it's like, in a way, everything's slowed down, but everything's sped up, like strangely.
Yes, that is true. True. So yeah, that's where we are in the multitasking jack of all trades type of world. Although that's not new for me. I'm sure it's not new for you either.
Right. Yeah. My producer was telling me about she was basically just listing the different things that you do. And I was like, oh my God, I don't even know which to talk about first. These are all so interesting.
Oh, we can get into them because apparently it fits your podcast really well.
Oh, yes. Because the whole idea is that oftentimes we're told that you should only do one thing or there's one true passion or things like that. But most people actually have multiple things that they're interested in.
Yeah. I don't think that's the world we live in anymore, where we do one thing. I don't think that's even possible, especially in this. They say post-pandemic. I think we're still in it, but you know what I mean. Evolving through the pandemia, whatever. I can't even.
I've been calling it the pandemic lull, where it's there are these phases where things are a little more chill.
Yeah.
It's not
over. It's like until people are vaccinated and there stops being all the mutations and whatnot. It's like, no, this is a lull, and there are people in the world who it's not a lull.
It's gonna be a minute, and we're just gonna coexist with it. That's basically it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Like I have the feeling it'll become more kind of like, we do live with the flu. We know how to have flu vaccines now, and we live with it, and it's just like, okay, here's this novel thing that we're going to figure out how to live with.
Exactly. It knocks us off, and then we continue. We step out of it somehow.
Yep.
I haven't had a flu in over a year though, so I mean, not even a cold. So that's partly because of what we've lived through.
Yes. I was like, knock wood, I have not either. Like, I have had allergies because I'm like allergic to everything, but like aside from that,
no, I think it's
that's a norm. But
I traveled recently, and I was like, how come I had never worn a mask in a plane before? This is the way to travel.
Yes.
I never not had a cold coming out of a plane. And I think I'm gonna keep it like that for life. That's it.
Yes, that's so funny you mentioned that. I haven't been on a plane yet. I was thinking of flying to visit some friends in Iceland.
Ooh.
Yes. It's like my favorite place in the world. And like it was interesting because I was thinking about the last time I flew there, how when I got off the plane, I felt like gross because I'd been on a plane, but then like breathing the fresh air there, it kind of revived me. But I was like, what if I didn't feel gross on a plane? And I thought about that. I was like, I wonder if I wear my mask on the plane, which of course I will I actually like step off the plane and feel gross, or will I actually like feel like a normal person?
Oh, I think it was fine. It's fine. We're getting there, Definitely, the vaccine thing helps.
Yes.
Cure and whatnot, but I felt pretty good. I was a little freaked out in New York, because I hadn't traveled in a year, and I was out of the country since September. I left New York for the first time, and meaning like I left New York. New York had been my city for 20 years.
Whoa.
Yes. So that was strange. And I've been in Santo Domingo for all those 10 months. And I thought it'd be fine, but it was a little shocking to not wear a mask, because New Yorkers are pretty much all vaccinated and not wearing a mask. And I was like, I'm not there yet.
It's almost like we'd been trained that this, people's faces, normally we see them. But then for a long time, it's like wearing a mask was a sign of safety and of respect and things like that. And to all of a sudden not, it's like too sudden of a shock to the system.
Yeah, it's constant evolution. That's what it is. So it's interesting. I also have my most New York moment ever, not living in New York anymore.
What happened?
Not permanently anyway. I saw Fran Lebowitz. Yeah.
Oh,
at the corner of 42nd and what was it? I think it was 43rd and 6th. And she was not wearing a mask. And I realized later that I was, because I was just coming out of the train station, the subway. And she looked at me like a freak. I don't know. I'm probably projecting because I was, oh my God, it's Fran Lebowitz. Do I talk to her? Do I not? And I wasn't gonna, but I said something. I said, thank you. You're wonderful.
Oh.
Granted, I know her from before the documentary. Like I've known her work any New Yorker knows her.
Yeah.
And she was like, thank you. Do you know what time it is? Okay. That's my, please don't speak to me. You're weird and you have a mask on, and no.
Oh my God.
With Fran Lebowitz.
Oh, that's so New York. I love it.
Travel treasure forever, I guess.
Thank you. What time is it?
Thank you. What time is it? Do you have the time? because I had a cell phone, and I'm like, oh, right, she doesn't have a cell phone, and I'm listening to music on my. Why did I speak to her? I went through all those emotions. I'm like, oh, come on, just snap out of it.
Oh my gosh. You know what? I'm glad that you spoke to her because that's a treasure. That's like such a good moment that like just the New York nonchalance of being like, thanks. So anyway.
I don't know. I kind of regretted it the moment I did it, but then I said snap out of it. You know what I mean?
Oh my gosh. It's so interesting because you touched on something that I feel like is a cultural difference even between Los Angeles and New York.
What is it?
Well, I was thinking when you saw Fran Lebowitz, I was just like, oh my gosh, she's like, the patron saint of New York. It's almost like whenever I see Angeline here, like whenever I see her pink car or like her on the street, I get so excited. It's like I've seen like the mascot of my city. Like, I'm just like, oh, it's you. And she like loves to take photographs of people. Like she loves to like she loves the attention. That's the whole thing is like she loves that she was the first person who pioneered being famous for being famous. Like that's her whole thing.
That's not
like not
that's a good New Yorker. Yeah. As a good New Yorker, she completely I think she feels disdain for it. Like, oh, why am I famous? I can't stand it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Of course, the person in LA, of course she would, that person would love it.
So funny is it's like, and there is a culture of, I would say like people who are famous here, there's very much a culture of just treat everybody like a person. You just, you be chill. But like it's kind of looked down upon for relatively, at least what I've observed growing up here. It's kind of looked down upon if famous people don't just chill with people. Like if they did that, if they acted kind of like almost, like, why are you speaking to me? Just tell me the time, oh plebeian with a cell phone. Like people would be like, oh, there's no snobby. What's their deal? Like everyone.
I do think cities have personality. I think New York would be the place to just leave me alone. I'm having a moment by myself.
Yes.
And there's kind of an agreement, an invisible agreement that's how it is. And in fact, I didn't ask for a photo. I didn't ask for, you just say hello and thank you. And I saw people say the same. She was nice enough to say thank you with time.
Right.
Anyway, that was our New York moment. 20 years in New York, that never happened to me. And yet just leave to have a New York moment.
Oh my God. I was like, that's precious. And I'm so curious. The other thing that struck me when you said that is like, given also that, like you just said, cities have personalities and that informs really who we are. And it's like, what was that like? You said that it's like New York isn't your permanent city anymore. And I'm like, that's a huge thing. Like that's a huge difference in identity where you're like, is this my city or was this my city?
It's absolutely. And you just said the key word there, which is identity. I've been, this has been a time of search, of course, I think for the world and whoever is taking the time and the opportunity see, I even forgot the word pandemic at the beginning. I said pandemia because that's the word in Spanish.
Yes.
Oh, forgetting English already. Gee. So it has been, I had my identity so tied to New York for 20 years. We were in a relationship, a marriage, I call it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for the last 4 years, it had been like, it was going south and we knew it. Literally, it felt like a 20-year marriage that's not working.
Oh.
And you're not, who's going to take the step? Who's going to out here? And then we were forced by life to make the decision. And the irony is I was actually in LA at the beginning of 2020.
Whoa.
I had taken a break from New York because I needed to go write. And I said, okay, I need to be isolated for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the universe took it too literal. Okay, I just meant me for like a month.
Legit.
Not the world. And I had taken that break, one, because I was in the process of writing a screenplay and I kind of needed the isolation.
Mm-hmm.
New York is just too hectic, too busy all the time.
Yes.
There was no way to sit down and not have a text or a phone call. Hey, what are you up to? We're here at the bar, or we're here at the museum, or we're going to watch a movie or a play.
Right.
Many distractions. So I went to LA also because I had been in that confusing times of whether I wanted to stay in New York or not, and feeling that is my place after 20 years in a city that I love, but it's kind of, it felt like it had fulfill a cycle, you know?
Yes.
And so the pandemic came while I was in LA. I had to be there for 2 months or 3, I think 3 months. Wow.
Oh, gosh.
And because also I couldn't go back to New York because I was in LA, I found out I had bed bugs in my apartment. Yes. So ironically, it was not the pandemic per se. It was the fact that I had bed bugs. And it was like, if you were just thinking for a minute to consider not to have this breakup, I'll take care of it.
Here's your sign. Here's
a sign. Yeah.
That is uncanny, because that was actually the beginning of my pandemic too, was bed bugs. Not for me, thankfully, but my group of friends that we tend to co-work together on creative projects, and 2 of them that lived together had bed bugs. And so we were helping them clean their house and fumigate, and they were staying at mine. And like, so it was 4 friends all together. And the news came about the pandemic, and we were just like, well, we've been like all up in each other's faces basically for the last few weeks. So either we all have it or like none of us have it. Like we're like, but we should stick together as a team. And so for a few months, like when LA went into lockdown, those were the only people I saw, because we just potted together. But yeah, it was literally because of bed bugs.
Hey, but I didn't know you had so funny, both sides of the country dealing with this issue. I have extreme panics now about it. Like I'm traumatized by this infection, and I'm like, oh, this is worse than the virus. At the time I thought that, then I realized, oh no, it's not. But you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
At that time where things were in that extreme, I really thought that having bed bugs was the worst thing that ever happened to me.
I mean, we had the same thought where we're like, what could be worse than like being driven from your home by the plague? And then it was like, oh my God, we're all being driven either from our home or into only our home by the plague. We're like, oh my God.
I had a double sign that it was time to break up with my city of 20 years. And it wasn't planned per se, but it had been in my mind. I didn't know where I would go.
Mm-hmm.
But my parents had the freaking virus at the beginning of the whole thing. Yeah.
Oh my God.
While I was in LA.
Oh no.
So I was going through so many things, and my first instinct was that I have to go home. I have to go to the Dominican Republic as soon as I can. So what I did was I went to New York, packed everything, threw away half my things because of course bed bugs.
Right. That's like to light everything on fire, just leave it.
Put notes and said, don't take it, this has bed bugs. And
oh my God.
And then I sent my life in 8 boxes to Dominican Republic. And,
wow.
Yeah, and I traveled there.
Wow.
And I've been there since September. Not in traditional terms, which is good. I could never be there, like, be setting up camp at the Capitol or anything, because I just don't fit in too much. But kind of in my terms, which has been interesting. I spent a lot of time at the beach. Not too shabby.
I mean, that sounds like, one, beautiful, but also I was so curious, like, one, how did you feel going back after you had broken up with your city? So now you're like, okay, like we're officially broken up, but it's almost like, one, returning to the place that hasn't been your city and hasn't been your space for like 20 years. And also I was like, how are your parents? Like the Jewish mom in me is like, oh my God, are your parents okay?
My parents are great. Today, well, as we're recording, because this is not going to come out today, but today as we record, It's their 43rd anniversary, wedding anniversary.
Oh.
And they set the bar very high because they still dance, cheek to cheek. And I'm like, oh gosh, I'm never gonna find that. I'm single for life, and my parents are like, oh, I love, they like each other, which is more important than loving each other, I think.
That's rare, quite honestly. Like seeing couples that like really truly delight in each other is just like, it's so precious.
Oh, it's like, ugh. No, it's great. It really is. And they're doing really well. They had the plague badly. But also, not a lot of information at the beginning.
Yeah.
But they passed it through. They survived, and they're great.
Oh,
and it's been interesting to be back after, because I had always been back. My family's in Dominican Republic, so I've never not been there some way or another. But of course, a few weeks at a time, and then back home to New York. So now it's the opposite. I'm like, oh, I was in DR for 10 months. Now I'm back home to New York. It's still up in the air. It's still like a marriage that ended. But I came back to New York feeling like, yeah, I'm sorry. We were married for 20 years. I'm not gonna ask permission to go into the kitchen, Right.
You're just like, we have this comfort level with each other, even though our relationship is not the same.
Correct. So we are entering amicable terms and an amicable relationship. I don't feel I'm married to DR. I feel like exploring and seeing what happens. And while doing that, I'm at the beach a lot.
There we go. I was like, that's a good place to be, in that like liminal space between cities, when you're like, okay, I'm going to court some different places. But I'm going to, have my rest and relaxation at the beach.
Yeah. And it's been a challenge at times because I've had to spend a lot of times at my parents', which is great, but also, you're suddenly 14 again. I'm like 41, going to 14. What's happening here?
Oh, it's a baffling experience. Like I said, I was potted with my friends, but my parents do live in Los Angeles, and the reason I didn't pod with them was literally only that, is like I said to both of them, I was just like, we have such a good relationship because we don't live in the same house.
Oh yeah.
Like, when we live in the same house, I was like, and I know some of it's on me. It's like I become more like kind of like a sulky teenager. Like, I'm like, give me my space, leave me alone.
It's literally all on me. I mean, I take full responsibility for the dysfunctional dynamic that happens when we are living together. I fully, or at least 90%.
That is so funny.
Yeah, especially when you've lived alone I am a very independent creature. Like, it's kind of annoying. I sometimes I have this little monster, and that monster needs to be alone and doesn't want to talk to anybody. And so having human interactions is like, in my mind, it's like, don't be rude. Come on, don't bother me. I'm alone. Oh, there it comes.
There it goes. Yep. That's my friends say that I have a cat-like temperament for that reason, is that like I, for the most part, will want to be alone doing my thing. And then I'm like, pay attention to me, but like from over there.
Well, you just described it as well. We are the same. I'm a cat lady for a reason, because I have a cat person. I understand them so well.
Yep.
Yeah. What's wrong with wanting their independence and, scratching people when they want to be touched?
I give a warning hiss. Before I scratch.
I do too. And I find it very responsible and, not kind, but certainly respectable.
Exactly. Oh my God. That is so funny, because I can imagine, like, during this time, how did all of that affect the things that you're creating? Because that was a very unique experience, talking to fellow creatives during this, to be like, what in the heck is going on? We're in these weird places. It's disrupted all of our routines. Like, what was that like for you? Because you have been creating a lot.
For me, it has been a source of creativity. It saved me from myself. Creating, saved me during the pandemic because I did spend a lot of time alone, and I had already isolated myself previously to write the screenplay,
Mm-hmm.
but I was in that space already, like I wanted it. So when, first of all, I live alone and I know how to be alone, so it wasn't something that challenged me tremendously.
Right.
It was welcome. I'm like, okay, here you are. I think I have more anxiety over my parents' health and
Yeah.
far away than for myself.
Yeah.
And I did have a little bit like you. My aunt, who was in LA from London, was with her aunt. She was between her aunt and myself. Like she was
Mm-hmm.
migrating from one apartment to another.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did have some company some days,
Yeah.
and then she would be gone, and I had my alone time. So, um, but aside from that, it's been interesting because I find that the challenges that this presented, I was able to canalize through writing.
Mm.
And I've had a lot of anxiety over my acting career,
Mm.
which was or is or has been a psychological breakthrough. It has been teaching me so much about many things about myself and life.
Mm-hmm.
So as much as it has been challenging, I've learned to kind of accept what it's teaching me. So among other things, I lost a job back in November for
Mm-hmm.
a series, in a Netflix series. And I was like so excited finally to get a job after so long, not only the pandemic, but before I hadn't worked in a long time. And then I lost it because of quarantine situation.
Mm.
There was some error in production and I wasn't given enough time to make it on time. And I just like that, lost the job. And that was intense to say
Yeah.
the least. I was depressed for like I think a month,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but I allowed myself to feel it, and which is the important thing.
Yes. Yes.
And instead of hiding it, like no, I'm fine. I'm like I told everybody, I'm not fine. I'm not fine. I haven't worked in forever. This was a great opportunity, and I lost it, and I'm not fine. And so that my podcast was born from that.
Oh. Oh.
Because I felt so there's something you can't control as many more things in your career because the only control I have is the work that I send, and then once I send it, let's say an audition,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what happens after that. I don't know, whether my weight or my height or my age play a role in not getting something. So, and I can't control any of that.
Right.
So I said, what can you do? Well, I can control what I create, when I take out to the
Mm-hmm.
world. And so um, I had this idea about a podcast that I could do in my native language for a change.
I love that. Keep going.
Because there's so many podcasts nowadays, and I am a podcast aficionado. I've been for years. And I can't believe it. This never occurred to me, but that happens when you're busy. So I was in a TV show,
Right.
job, and I didn't have to create anything because I had a job.
Right. You're like, I'm already involved in all of these collaborative projects.
Exactly. So I was already involved in things, but the moment this void came, the need to survive it came as well. And so it was through the creating of this, and the idea of doing it in English did come, but I thought I'm going to be one more in a race of so many. What can I do that is different?
Right.
And it said, well, there's not as competitive a field in Spanish. It's a little bit green, a little bit more virgin, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
even though there's many now. But also it could connect me with that part of my life. And I could bring conversations that I know I've been having for years,
Mm-hmm.
but are not as often discussed in Latin America or in the Hispanic, world.
Mm-hmm.
And so And so that's what we did. And we've had conversations I had a conversation with a trans friend of mine. She's from Argentina. And we had this beautiful engagement about her entire life, and from being in prostitution and drugs in Argentina to becoming a trans woman activist in New York.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was beautiful to have in Spanish, because it's such a taboo in my country, for sure, in DR.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I created that with just let me say, one episode in English. Because I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna lose that wonderful audience that I have, and all these wonderful relationships I have in the English speaking world. So I decided I would do one English episode per month,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
all of the rest in Spanish. And that's a new project that came from losing something else.
Nature abhors a vacuum. So I was like, that's like spot on. It's like whenever people are like, oh, well, how do I make something happen? I'm like, you have to make the space for it. Like if there's no space for, those ideas and that stuff to come, it's not going to arrive yet because you haven't made space for it. It's like you have to be uncomfortable a bit to like let something come in.
I think that's the key. I think it's allowing yourself to be uncomfortable and letting it show you what it has to show you.
I loved that you actually did disclose to people that you weren't okay. I was like, not that I feel bad that you weren't okay, but I'm glad you're honest about it.
I did. I told everybody. I didn't pretend. That's one thing that happened. Like it's uncomfortable because you don't want to let your parents see you, down. There's that thing. I think it comes both ways, right? They don't want to see you, and you don't want to see them not being okay.
Yeah.
But it was a moment of bonding for us, because I told them, look, I'm not gonna pretend that this didn't hit me hard.
Yeah.
I told everybody around me, and so that I could be in my mood without feeling like I was hurting someone's feelings, or being at some moment maybe trying so hard to be okay and then biting someone who didn't deserve it.
Yes, it's more authentic because also then you're interacting with people in, like, I think it's Brene Brown who's researched a lot on like shame and vulnerability. It's like that's an appropriate level of vulnerability where it's like you are putting yourself out there by letting people see where you're actually at. So then you can actually have the interactions that, are going to actually foster closeness and connection, as opposed to, like you said, you're like, I don't want to accidentally bite someone or pretend that I'm okay. Like,
I also I think there's a moment where you have to use all the skills that you've learned, right? So I did sit down with myself. Like I closed the door. I told them I'm not okay. So I think I was in my room for like 72 hours or so. And granted, I'm not there all the time, but I was there at the time a lot because I didn't have a space to be yet. And I did have to like go through it myself. I do have a therapist who helped me through all of this,
Awesome.
And yeah, and so we discussed it, because I've been dealing for many years with insomnia, but I had finally had it under control throughout the summer. I was making all these changes that I needed to make, and kind of being proactive about what I wanted, or at least proactive about not doing what I didn't want to do anymore. This comes and my insomnia kicked in again.
Oh yeah.
And so, things that it has taught me is like, oh, this is a manifestation of anxiety. And of course, I just lost a job. I haven't worked in forever. I'm not really on my feet yet. And so I did, like I said, I did feel my feelings. I did watch episodes of things that make me happy, and
yes.
In my case, Curb Your Enthusiasm, some Sex in the City here and there. Lots of independent movies that I love that are usually think like, that's depressing. Well, don't make me, this is how this makes me happy. To see other people depressed makes me happy.
Yeah.
Yeah, in movies, not in real life, but in movies, in movies, I just feel less alone.
Yes, that's the value of like sad art. When people are like, "Oh my gosh, that song is so depressing," well, I was like, "Yeah, it's great."
Yeah, give me some Todd Solondz when I'm depressed,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. You're like, make it dark, make it darker.
Yeah, and again, I think it really did help to make that creativity come back at some point to save me from myself and from my blues and all that. So it all comes in waves and comes and goes, and it has been, for the most part, a wonderful lesson.
Yes.
And a challenging one, of course.
I love what you said also about that the conversations you're having are ones that normally might not occur. And also that when you said that your choice to, do it in Spanish, I was like, there's such a difference when you return to a different language. Like, I don't know how else to put it. Like, I've talked to people who I sadly am not fully fluent in languages that aren't English, which is such a bummer. I have like a smattering of different languages in my head. But I think about how different it is when you're expressing yourself, for instance, in a language that you spoke in your childhood, or a language that speaks more to your emotions, or a language that speaks more to your cognitions and to your experience later in life. Like, languages can have different implications, and also how you express yourself in those languages is going to be very different.
It's very different, but also coming from such a liberal city like New York and finding, oh my God, I've been living in such a bubble for so long, which I've always been aware of. I created it.
Yes.
I love my country. It's a beautiful country, and there's very good people, but there's also a lot of backward shit that's not right. Like, we're still fighting for exceptions in abortion cases.
Wow.
Abortion is forbidden in all cases.
Wow.
No matter what, a woman is punished. And we just went back in time a week ago regarding some homophobia stuff in Congress. And I'm like, are you kidding me right now? And so it's been interesting like that way also, because I have more of I've always been like this, but now living in New York for 20 years, my perspective is so liberal, it's so open and so diverse. And so I feel in a way that I'm bringing something to my country back, that because liberal people are there too, but we are way more isolated.
Right.
And so one thing that I've learned through my work and through the arts and through living in New York, surrounded by artists for so long, is that talking makes us feel less alone.
Yes.
And so this podcast that I'm doing, as well as a column that I'm writing over there in a newspaper, which is about me.
I love this.
Yeah, it's called Laura Gomez Personal in Spanish. And it was supposed to be light and just let me tell you what it is to be a single woman coming from New York and whatever. And now I'm like, oh, and also let me tell you what I think about homophobia, and let me tell you what I think about you taking my rights as a woman.
Bingo.
Yeah, and F you. Yep. And we're not gonna have it. And so it kind of it has been very interesting.
Yes.
Because it's not preaching to the choir here. It's like, how do I have these discussions in a way that hopefully a few people can also listen,
I like that you framed it as a discussion, because I think that that's something that is often lacking. And even in American culture, there's a distinct lack of conversation and discourse. It's more just like, maybe if I yell at you really loudly, then like I'll get my point across. And I was just like, surprisingly, I don't think anyone has ever made their point clear by yelling.
Yeah, I think that's one of the beautiful things of this process, is that I used to yell a lot because I was angry and I was younger, and that's totally understandable that you have all these frustrations. But then I've matured, it's interesting to channel that anger and it does affect me. It does affect me. And of course I need therapy for it.
Yeah, I was like, we're very pro therapy here, she says,
Yes,
being a therapist.
I am so much. But I have found that exactly what you're saying, that the dialogue demands more from me as well. It demands understanding and some compassion even for
Mm-hmm.
my own country. Um, and again, I don't want to preach to the choir.
Right.
That's New York. I already have that, so I can always bounce back there when I need some support. But here, again, the liberal people and there are many, are way more isolated. So I think it's a way of calling each other, but also trying to those in the middle tell you, like, look, we're not trying to threaten you here.
Right.
We're trying to find middle ground,
Right.
and we may never understand each other, but can we respect each other? Can we have a conversation about what it is to be gay that maybe you don't understand?
Yeah.
Can I wrote a piece last week about being an ally and why, and that's been beautiful in a way. That's one of the gifts that this challenge has brought.
I was gonna say, and being able to express yourself within it's just fascinating to me the way that you highlighted the different cultures of being like in the liberal bubble of New York. And similarly, like I very much feel that in LA.
Yeah.
And then being like, okay, I'm in the Dominican Republic. And this is, I mean, it is you as well, but it's a very different part of you. And it's like returning to that part of you and being like, what can I bring back? How can I find middle ground? How can I express myself in a way that other people will have a dialogue and maybe think about things differently? Like not attacking people, just be like, hey, have you considered it from this angle?
It informed a lot of my processing of, let's say, Trump era.
Yeah.
I was very angry, as everybody was, but I wasn't one of those people demonizing Trumpists, or Trump people. I thought, where is it coming from?
Mhm.
Rather than fuck everybody. I'm like, how about we find out what the source of this frustration is? How about we also criticize our side? How about we check in as to what the system is doing, instead of putting all blame on one person, because I don't believe in that.
No.
But that comes from my experience in my own country. Like, where is this coming from?
Yeah.
And also, it informs a little bit as to how naive we can be also sometimes in our bubbles.
Yes.
And how much all this anger, all this cancel culture stuff, I'm not into it much. Even if it's not the people even if it's people I don't like a lot.
Oh my God. I'm so glad you're bringing this up. I feel so similarly.
I think it's very necessary to have these conversations and to evolve. And I think there's a lot that I appreciate. I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate the anger. I appreciate the call to action, the listen to me because I'm talking and you haven't heard me in, a whole existence.
Yes.
So I do support that. And I do think that there's much that needs to change in our society in terms of behavior, especially toxic masculinity and all that bullshit.
Yeah.
But how we're going about it in terms of, listen, this has existed as a system where we women participate as well, and perpetuate. And the reason I say this is because in my country it's so clear, and we are not where the US is in those terms.
Yeah.
And so some things that seem progressive for us in my countries, for people, could be threatening. And so I'm in this place where I'm trying to translate. So I act as a translator a lot in terms of social.
Oh my gosh.
Stuff.
I can imagine.
So I'm very patient with change, I guess.
That's a good way to be, because especially highlighting change itself, like, because for me at least, and I don't know about you, but like for me, kind of the opposite of cancel culture is like accountability, where it's like talk to someone about like what's going wrong. And of course, if that person continues to do something that's disrespectful, like, you don't you don't spend time with that person, or you don't recommend that people work with that person. But
that's another thing. That's a very different thing, because that's completely valid. I think it's very valid to have limits.
Yes.
Professional and personal. If people don't evolve,
yeah,
they're out of my life. I mean, I'm sorry, you're out. I'm evolving, you're not evolving with me. That happens even in a relationship with a partner or with a city.
That's what I was thinking, where I was just like, it sounds like in a way you evolved past New York, just like we're talking about how people, like, at the very least, you have to give them a chance to evolve. You have to communicate, like, instead of just this polarized, like, good, bad, right, wrong, like all this stuff. It's like, at least give people the chance to.
I think it's an interesting time, I think. And, I go back and forth about it. Sometimes I'm distressed about it. Sometimes I'm excited about it, because it's definitely a time of evolution. We are in a time of change. Something is changing. We are learning new set of rules, and many of us have resisted, and some of us are moving forward with the changes, and some are staying behind. But the truth is, I think this generation, the younger generation, as much as they want things to happen very quickly, they are also way more tolerant than probably my generation and above. And sometimes I joke about it, because with my friends, especially with like, and I'm gonna generalize here like crazy. It's like, oh, Latino man, it drives me crazy because we're so behind. Come on, I can't date a Latino my age because they're like living in the 1940s.
Yep.
And of course, let me very clearly, there are exceptions to the rule. But the truth is that there's a reason for that. It's generational, and there's some sort of resistance to certain changes. And I think changes are taken easier when it's individually, but collectively, we're still going through the resistance of it.
Yes, it's almost like watching a temper tantrum because someone doesn't want to change.
It's an interesting time for introspection. It's an opportunity for introspection if we take it. And I think one of the main things is he should feel uncomfortable for a while.
Yeah,
that's how it should be.
Yeah,
because I think it's a space to what's happening right now. Also, is there is a lot more awareness as to the privilege that we've had. And I think for change, I'm not a person who's afraid of that word. We all have certain privileges according to who we are. I'm a, fair-skinned Latina. I don't have black skin. I always say that, like, I cannot know what it is to have that extra layer.
Yes.
I can only imagine, and have empathy for, because as a woman and a Latino woman, I understand certain things. Right. But in that position where you barely have had any, conflict society-wise, you really have to do the work and feel uncomfortable for a minute. And I know that's happening a lot in this country. Again, it's very different from my countries, to different realities. But I do feel it's an interesting time, because fear is a messenger as well, if we want to take it that way.
Oh, I love that phrase, fear is a messenger.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh my gosh. I was like, that's a remarkable turn of phrase. I was like, I want to embroider that on a pillow.
If you want to listen to it and turn it into something else, what are you going to turn it into? Anger, or are you going to turn it into empathy? Mm-hmm. There's a moment there. There's like a fork. Mm-hmm. And I think the society, we're not necessarily doing a great job with that. We are also not doing a great job of, choosing great leaders in this world either. So,
oh boy. Yeah. And there's, in a way, what you were talking about, that it sparked you to create, and that in essence, there were certain things that were outside of your control, as things often are, but that you reached for the things that you could control, like your creative output. And that has so much to do with, like, how to foster empathy. Like, we foster empathy a lot through the media that we consume, through our creations. And it's like, in a way, I mean, it sounds very idealistic, but I at least think that, like, if you can just affect one person Like with each thing you create, if like one person is like, oh, I didn't think of it that way, or oh, I haven't felt that feeling before, oh, I felt uncomfortable, but then I was okay. Like
Yeah,
if you can guide at least one person through that, through your creations, I'm like, oh, that's awesome. That actually is what, will build empathy, because people tend to turn to the arts for that.
I agree. And like the script that I finished, by the way. I'm excited about
Yay! Congratulations.
it's precisely about those type of things. I mean, we're talking about many things here, but it's kind of healing through that type of work. And I wrote a piece about a Dominican woman who is in a marriage and whose marriage is going south because the husband, wants a child and she doesn't.
Mm.
And so it was a way of exploring things that for many years were so uncomfortable for me.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel like I fit in, and what's wrong with me, and pretty much things that we are conditioned to believe. But when you are from my culture, even more so, because that
Right.
you're not a mother, you're not fulfilled, you're not a full woman, and we all, I mean, I
Right.
think as women, we have been conditioned to feel that way for so long, and that was a reality that I lived through in when I was married. And so many years later, I'm exploring that, but I'm also doing it because I'm trying to write roles that are not usually given to people of color.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm usually the maid or whatever cliche, which is fine, pays a job, but it's not all that we are.
Right.
And it did get to me like, how come universal stories are usually told to white people? This is my marriage story.
Right.
And they just happen to be from another culture. And so I don't know why I mixed it. I think because we were talking about being uncomfortable and creating, and that's a part of what I'm creating now as well, is kind of moving into the direction of writing and directing, because I feel like those are voices that are needed behind the scenes. I'm such a big advocate for women and women of color behind the camera.
Yes, because oh gosh, I was talking to a photographer about this, about, well, I mean, the difference between like the male and female gaze, really. And exactly like you're talking about, like telling a marriage story that is not a marriage story from the point of view of either a white man or a white couple.
Totally.
And that, even like thinking about that, I was like, oh, we have so many stories that are heterosexual stories in our culture. And there's not that many stories that are actually like from queer culture that are not as what did one of my friends dub it? They said something really funny about the fact that like all queer stories are always like some sort of like tragedy. Like there's never a story where it's like,
Yeah.
and then, they were gay and it was fine. And then
well, I mean, first of all, it's funny because in my script, my best friend and his husband are a couple. I mean, they have a role in it.
Mhm.
They're a beautiful gay couple, and they happen to have the more stable relationship.
Excellent.
But they're struggling with the rejection of their family in the Dominican Republic, so that I'm also exploring that. And since you mentioned that there's not as many stories that are queer stories, let me plug in a show from some friends of mine.
Yes.
In Amsterdam, because I was a guest star in season 2. It's a show called N Plus, which is streaming. I believe it's streaming now on Netflix in the US and in Canada. It's surely it's streaming somewhere. And it's funny because I met them at Tribeca, and I loved it. And I just told them, look, you write the way I do. It's like, this is a story of a woman who's exploring her life, and she just happens to be gay. In my case, she just happens to be Latina, but it's not what defines the story.
Right.
And so Unplus is the story of this young woman kind of searching for herself. And while she does that, she's having the most fun in Amsterdam. And she just happens to be a lesbian, and and it's a beautiful, fun kind of Sex and the City-ish in Amsterdam. It was created by these young queer women in Amsterdam. They were trying to create stories that were not, like you said, always marked by tragedy. And we're like, we're having fun in our 20s. Can we just tell that story?
And they tell the story of actually having fun.
I care about seeing different perspectives of things. And if it's like, let's say, a TV show, I'm hoping there's a very diverse writing room there so that it's not one-sided and that people are informed about other cultures' experiences. But one of my favorite films, is Sense and Sensibility, and it's directed by Ang Lee.
Yes.
And I don't think there's a more British film ever.
Yes.
and so, you know, or Tarantino, the way he writes Black characters, or Spike Lee, the way he writes Italian, I am just interested in quality.
That's true. That's true. Like, because my very favorite, I mean, the thing that I will watch over and over again is Twin Peaks. I will watch.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm. I will, and there are problematic aspects of that show, but I see something that is beautiful and horrible every time I watch that show. And I don't even know how many times I've watched through it now, which is funny for someone who doesn't sit still for more than 10 minutes. It's like, there's something about it.
I haven't seen the new version. I saw the original.
Oh, season 3 it has such a different tenor to it. Like, it still is like the world of Twin Peaks, but it's more, okay, that was going to sound so California. I was like, meditate. It's very like, it clearly is informed by years and years of meditation and unconscious work. Like, there's so much in it that at first I was like, why didn't he edit more of this? And then I understood that. I was like, oh, this is actually some of the stuff that does come up when you really are getting deep into like unconscious kind of unraveling of narrative. Yeah. And so I found it fascinating. And there were certain episodes, like, I don't want to, I mean, you can't spoil Twin Peaks because, like, it's Twin Peaks, but
well, I'll get into it. And
so good.
It didn't sound, well, maybe it sounds California, but again, as someone who had serious crisis of insomnia, I can tell you that meditation saved my life.
Excellent. I too have insomnia, and I'm like, what form of meditation did you practice? Because that's very good to know.
I can't even say that it was very conscious. I found an app and I started from scratch because I didn't even know how to do that. I'm like, what is this? I need something. I've heard that this helps. And I did it in autopilot for so long because I didn't understand it. I thought, this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
Until just by doing it.
Yep.
Just by doing it in repetition without intellectualizing it too much. I found it to be, transformative.
Yeah.
It allowed me to survive those months of chronic insomnia I had. And not to jump out the window. Right.
And I'm so sorry that you too suffer from insomnia, because it's a very surreal thing to be like, no, I'd like to rest. And your brain is like, would you like to research aardvarks? And you're like, no, I would not. And your brain's like, well, you're gonna. And you're like, no, I want to go to sleep.
Yeah.
But like,
of anxiety, but I had it really bad. And so I really had to explore it deeply. Like, I'm doing cognitive therapy. It's on that level.
Excellent. Like, I mean, not excellent that it got that.
No, I know.
Excellent that you're like doing that intervention, because I was like, that's in regards to anxiety. It's so interesting that a lot of it speaks really to such a powerful and imaginative mind, because if you can think of all the ways that something can go horribly awry, you can also probably think of like the converse. Like, you can fantasize about all the ways that things could go like horribly beautifully.
Oh, that's so nice for you to put it that way. I must be so dark because I don't even have children. Why am I thinking so much about the ocean going, dry, and the water situation that we're having, the third world war?
Because you have empathy. You have empathy for others. Like, given all that you're creating, I was like, that speaks to a wellspring of empathy there.
Which is why I'm watching Schitt's Creek right now and trying not to think so much about things that make me anxious, because
that show is like comfort food. I love that show.
It's like comfort food. But my real comfort place is Curb Your Enthusiasm.
That is so funny.
I'm counting the weeks or whatever it is until next season, but I hadn't seen Schitt's Creek, and now I'm watching it and I'm having a lot of fun watching.
Oh my gosh. Well, and delving into stories, like I did really like what you said, that you're like, I hope that there's a diverse cast. I hope that there's a diverse writer's room. But when it comes down to it, it's like stories are what foster empathy in a way. At least that's how I conceptualize it, where it's like, if you can witness someone else's story, you can see, oh, this person's experience might be different than mine, but that's not threatening. Like when we were talking about like people being resistant to change and, you know, feeling that fear, it's knowing that like someone else can have a different experience and you can relate to it, even if it's not your experience, and to know that that doesn't negate your experience, essentially.
Correct. Yeah.
And so witnessing stories is like really powerful.
We humans, we complicate everything. It's so simple.
I'm like, it could be so easy, and instead we're doing like 12 bazillion things. That's
Here we are. I guess we're so complex. We have to make everything so difficult.
I'm always looking for like, oh, what's the phrase called? It's Occam's razor, where it's like always looking for like, what is the simplest explanation? Where it's like, I think that's the only reason why, like when you were talking about like, why do people feel this anger, or why, you know, like the Trumpists and like things like that, I think about like with conspiracy theorists, like the reason why like I could never fall victim to that in a way is that I'm like, have you ever worked on a group project? Like no one can keep it secret. No one can keep it together. Like, I'm like, I don't think that that's what's happening, because like, have you ever tried to, I don't know, like write a research paper with like 3 people? It doesn't go well. And so it's like, I'm like, okay, that's not the way. But like tapping into like, what's the emotion behind that? It's like, oh, you're looking for something that makes this make sense. You're looking for a sense of control. You're looking because you feel out of control. Like, oh, you're looking for a story.
Like, absolutely. You hit it on the nail. I think that's part of it. It's funny because I always say that. I'm like, you know, I'm very good individually with people. I don't know. I don't belong to many groups. And when I do, I always have limits to it. Because I think it does changes it changes the experience overall, because it's too many heads and too many opinions and many egos in the same place. So
yeah. Oh my gosh, that is, I can't wait. By the way, like I was like, I want to actually see the film that you wrote. I was just like, I want to witness that just as a story, because it's so rare. Like when you're talking especially about like maybe not getting cast because of your age or things like that really spoke to me, and that like we're close to the same age. And I've certainly been observing, I'm rather petite. I'm basically a, you know, small white Jewish girl. And people perceive me sometimes as younger, and then I open my mouth and they're like, oh no, oh wait, hold up. Like, and perceiving the difference almost as I don't know how to put it other than, as women age, we just grow more powerful and interesting, and that seems to freak people out.
You know,
like,
I don't know that it freaks people out, but it certainly the system is designed for us not to have power. And it's funny because I grew up, I guess, being always very open-minded in terms of feminist issues, but in the times that I grew up, feminist was like a curse. It was a bad word. And so I did have a feminist mentality, but I always thought, I'm not a feminist. I do believe in equality, and I believe women can do whatever we want, and we should be able to have rights, but I'm not a feminist.
Right.
And, yeah. So it took me forever to get out of my head this idea, this conditioning that feminists were this raging man-hater, you know,
right,
creatures, and be like, no. These are humans who have lived through a system
yeah,
that has tried to make them invisible, and I have so much respect for that movement. And so I do feel that we've been conditioned to think that we are crazy when we get to this age and think that, and it's like, no, we are able to observe it and now live through it.
exactly. And that's, I love what you said about that, because for a long time I felt very similarly, where though I did identify as a feminist, I always would be like, oh, but I'm not that kind of feminist. I'm a nice.
At least you said that. I'm not a feminist. No way.
Yeah.
And now I have such a different, I don't like labels per se, but I think some labels are necessary at some point in history because of whatever it's happening.
Right.
And so I do use it proudly.
Yes, I feel similarly in that at the very least, I feel like labels help you, one, identify your values, but also potentially signal to someone else like, hey, I'm on team. Or it's like, you're okay here. Like how you were talking about how to be, how to learn more about allyship.
Yes. It's an interesting concept. And for some of us it's so easy and we're in the right circles and surrounded by diversity, but in some cases that's not the situation, and so
right.
I understand how it can lead to resistance, basically. See how I'm forgetting English? I'm sorry.
It's so interesting that you speak like, I wish that I were fluent in different languages. That's the thing, is like I said, I have this like weird melange of,
well, because everybody speaks English. It's a little, you see, from necessity. I'm writing from necessity. So when you don't have the necessity, why most of the time it doesn't push you to. So it's understandable.
Yes, and like it's very strange, because I think that particularly there's a potency in having a different language that's not English, because English, it kind of reminds me of like a universal converter, where it's like, yeah, you can plug stuff into it and it works. And English, I do think, can be a very evocative language. But English is sort of just like a smush of the other languages. And so it's like,
yeah, I think it's a transaction language. It's like the language of transactions.
Yeah.
Let's cut to the chase. Spanish is long and so many terms for a week. A different type of music, for sure. I wish I could speak other languages other than the two that I speak. Like I speak a little bit of French. Because I studied when I was in high school. I went to the French Alliance for 2 years. So I have a very basic French, and I wish I had continued it. You have no idea how much I wish. So I understand your yearning, for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for joining me.
So much.
This has been such a pleasure.
Thank you again for listening to this episode of Why Not Both. If you liked what you heard, please make sure to like us and subscribe to us on your preferred podcast platform. You can also come hang out with us on social media. We are at WNB the podcast, both on Instagram and on Twitter. This season, we are brought to you by Under the Radar magazine. Under the Radar is a nationally distributed print, music, and entertainment magazine and website. You can find them at www.undertheradarmag.com, and feel free to support them on Patreon. Extra special thanks to our producer, Laura Studeris, who is literally a rock star. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you next episode.